Throughout the ages, humanity has looked up to the sky and seen the same mesmerizing sight. Shining sun, white clouds, soaring birds, and the endless peaceful blue. But now something new has been added to this landscape, and it's no ordinary natural phenomenon. Long, thin streaks that cover the sky as if drawn with a pencil. Are these just innocent airplane tracks? Or are they silent signs of a much deeper, dark, and dangerous plan? In recent years, suspicions about these traces have been growing. Some claim that they are chemical fallout that makes people sick, disrupts the environment, and is even used for mind control. But has the air we breathe really become a weapon silently poisoning us? Let's discover together the secrets behind these mysterious traces from the sky and the most frightening allegations, and go deeper into the conspiracy theories to uncover the truth. Welcome to Find the Truth. Chemtrails, or chemtrails in its long form in Turkish, became a part of popular culture and the conspiracy world in the 1990s with the introduction of the internet into our lives, especially the channels that made radio programs on mysterious topics, which were mostly made in rural areas of Central America where education was lower, told the public about a new phenomenon. At first, many people in the hinterlands actually attributed this phenomenon to UFOs. They go to sleep in the evening, and in the morning they look up, and there are mysterious lines in the air. There was a lot of discussion about this for a while, but then as flights increased and people became more accustomed to the airplane phenomenon, these traces ceased to be related to UFOs. But this time, a new conspiracy was born: why the planes were leaving these traces and why these traces did not dissipate for a long time. These questions were asked everywhere, especially with the explosion of the internet forums, and people started to share images that every plane we saw in the air was not actually an innocent commercial plane, and disturbing images. Chemicals released into the air from planes and everywhere in the world where there were innocent people. How could this have happened? Who could have done this and why? And as people searched for answers to these questions, the frightening possibility began to emerge. What if someone was doing this to reduce our numbers, seeing us as insects, just as farmers spray their fields from the air to protect them from pests? Between 1961 and 1971, when the Vietnam War was raging and the U.S. was suffering serious losses despite all its power, the U.S. Army launched the inhumane Operation Ranch Hand, which has written its name in history and blood. The purpose of this operation was to fly over the forest where Viet Cong soldiers were hiding and spray chemicals called Agent Orange, Agent Blue, White, and Purple from airplanes. The purpose of these substances was to destroy, yes, literally destroy, all the nature where they were sprayed so that there was no vegetation for the soldiers to hide in, so that the Americans could easily kill the soldiers who could not hide. As I said before, this operation was only on paper. The real purpose was much darker. I have repeatedly stated in my previous videos that America is the greatest enemy of humanity, and here we will see the most painful example of this again. Tons of chemicals released in the Ranch Hand operation literally destroyed nature, yes, but it also destroyed people. During the operation, about 5 million Vietnamese people, most of them innocent civilians, were exposed to these chemicals, and as a result, 400,000 people died in 10 years. In the following years, there were more than 500,000 cases of birth defects, and many babies died. 2.8 million people died due to the explosion in cancer rates. Even today, even the third-generation descendants of people exposed to this chemical still have health problems, and the destruction of the natural area has not recovered. How? But isn't it a very dramatic event for the so-called land of the free, which claims to be in charge of keeping the peace in the world? But there was a war at the time. The circumstances demanded it. Otherwise, it wouldn't have happened. Even so, at least it wouldn't have done this to its own people. I want to tell you about a few more operations on our dark journey, but these will not be the ones on the battlefields, but the ones that the United States itself has done to its own people. Between 1950 and 1958, the U.S. conducted multiple biological and chemical weapons tests, especially in California for some reason. Now, when I say this, you will think that they did it in empty areas, But no, the situation is much worse. The U.S. itself secretly conducted experiments on its own people in densely populated areas such as Los Angeles and San Francisco. In 1957, in Operation LAC, the Large Area Effect Operation, a chemical called zinc cadmium sulfide, was sprayed from the air in 29 different cities, and its effect on the city was examined. Of course, the American people became aware of this event years later. And interestingly, in the 10 years following the experiment, there was a jump in cancer cases in the regions. Of course, this may be related to lifestyle, but considering the sudden increase in the fact that cadmium is a serious carcinogenic substance for humans, you can fill in the gap. Is it over? Of course not. In 1950 in San Francisco, the U.S. military sprayed the bacteria Serratia marcescens from ships on the shore into the city and examined the distribution of a biological weapon in a large city. In the days that followed, thousands of people were hospitalized with severe urinary tract infections, and 10% of the patients died. And once again, the innocent public only became aware of all this years later when the operations were exposed. Finally, there is a biological weapons operation known as Operation Big Buzz, which was carried out by the U.S. Army in the state of Georgia in 1955. As you can infer from the name, this was an operation involving weaponized mosquitoes. Flies injected with yellow fever disease were released in certain areas around the state, especially in the town of Carver, where blacks lived, and it was observed how they would make people sick, and the information about how many people died or got sick has not been shared even today. In short, in the eyes of most states, the first segment to be wasted is the people. And as you can see in these examples, weapons are usually tested on their own people before the enemy. So when we see the traces left by airplanes in the air, people naturally get the idea that this is a chemical weapon, and they are not wrong. After all, these are not fantasy fiction. There are dozens of experiments that have been done over and over again and have caused the deaths of thousands of innocent people, some of which you have just seen. So now we come to find the answer to our big question: are airplanes poisoning us? Or are the facts of this business much different than we think? The working principle of the airplane engine is based on taking the air in front of it, compressing it in the engine, sending it to the combustion chamber, burning it with jet fuel, and turning the turbines with a large amount of compressed and hot gas. And this high-speed gas flow gives the plane the required thrust. Now, the key word here is the word hot gas. The temperature of the gas expelled from the engines of the airplane is 900 degrees on average, and at 9 to 12 kilometers, the altitude at which the airplanes fly. The temperature of the air is usually minus 40 to minus 60 degrees. Now, we all have a basic knowledge of physics. What happens when a 900-degree gas is exposed to 60-degree air? The gas suddenly condenses and forms small ice crystals in the air. So the white trail behind the plane is the result of this condensation. The biggest reason for the slow dissipation of this artificial cloud-like dense structure is the altitude at which it is located. While a normal cloud is about 3 kilometers above the ground, these trails are located at 10 to 12 kilometers. And since there are less air currents at this altitude, it takes very long to dissipate. Now let's come to the questions in our minds. Can small interventions to these gases be used to make weapons that poison us in the long run? Let's examine this claim a little bit. When we examine the chemtrail event on the internet, we often come across these photos, and they are presented to us that they are poisoning people like this in the image of a commercial airplane. However, there is a great disinformation here. When airplanes are first built, when they go on test flights, they are filled with water tankers because they cannot take 300 passengers on board, so that the necessary weight tests are carried out. When these images are combined with different spraying images taken during the Vietnam War or military exercises, you automatically get the misinformation you just mentioned. All the spraying experiments and operations I have just told you about, including Vietnam, were carried out at a maximum height of a few hundred meters above the ground. Even the ranch hand operation in Vietnam, which is the worst, has an average flight altitude of 150 meters. And the reason for this is to ensure that the sprayed chemical lands on the ground in an effective and controlled manner without excessive dispersion in the atmosphere, 0.000 meters high. Even if you spray the most deadly chemical, that gas will be dispersed 1,000 times by air currents and winds until it comes down from the atmosphere. The gas you spray in Istanbul can even go all the way to Iran without hitting Istanbul. So you cannot control the area where it will fall in any way, and its effectiveness is over. It's like pouring a glass of acid into the ocean and expecting everyone to be poisoned. Let's leave all the laws of physics aside. Let's say the simplest thing. Planes even remove the toilets to get one more passenger. They even charge a lot of money for your suitcase to save space. A plane that will fly thousands of kilometers will carry a system that will constantly spray that gas behind it, which means that the plane will consist entirely of tankers that will carry those chemicals. Again, one of the most frequently given examples in conspiracy forums is the stories that show the tests conducted years ago in the towns below these lines, and that the barium values were very high. For example, in the late 90s and early 2000s, activist Clifford Carnicom claimed to have taken water and soil samples in New Mexico and Arizona and examined them and found high levels of barium and aluminum. But when the authorities asked him to conduct the experiment in different locations, he refused. Apart from that, the activist groups around Mount Shasta, the Oklahoma amateur groups, have always said that we did an analysis. We examined rainwater, we examined the air, we found high levels of barium and aluminum, and they have refused to repeat these experiments in private or state laboratories with media control or different observers. In short, if you really want to poison someone, you have to do it from a few hundred meters at most and directly. There is no truth to the claim that they are poisoning us with commercial planes. But as I always say, just because one conspiracy is wrong does not mean that all of them are wrong. Look, there are dozens of real events that I have given you various examples of throughout the video, and they are much worse than this claim. Examine them. This chemtrails thing is a claim that became popular in the forums during the uncontrolled internet disinformation period of the 90s, after those real events, and became a source of income for radio channels and some writers who ate people. I have told you in my previous videos how popular they are in the United States. As I have said in all such videos, I say again and again that even if chemtrails are not real, the people who gave yellow fever to mosquitoes and released them on their people even in 1950, what will they not do to you when they have this technology in 2025? So look beyond the conspiracies that are served to you to keep you busy. For example, they shout at every opportunity that they will reduce the population, but do you really think they will do it with airplanes from 10 kilometers above? There has been an explosion in the number of flights since the 1980s. But since then, there has been an explosion in the population, so if you say that the planes are releasing gas that does not reduce the population, but on the contrary increases the population, at least it would be more compatible with the available data. If you are really curious about population reduction projects, go and examine which giant companies are the owners of packaged food companies. What kind of chemicals they put in these foods that dramatically reduce the sperm count of men. Examine how the pesticides used in the fields explode cancer. Examine who the owners of pharmaceutical companies are. How both pharmaceutical, food, and agricultural companies are in the hands of the same large roof groups. Then you will understand this. In order to understand population reduction plans, you need to look at the food on your plate first, rather than looking at the clouds in the sky. In short, yes, there are very troubling events and serious conspiracies going on in this world. Respiratory infectious diseases that have recently become abnormally strong, sudden heart attacks, food chemicals, hormones added to water, human manipulation using big data, social psychology deterioration with negative news. There are many more. If I tell each of them, there would be hundreds of videos of content, and I will tell most of them. But at least the allegation of the release of a lethal gas from commercial airplanes does not seem to be one of them, so at least you can rest assured on this issue. But if you see an airplane flying at a low altitude of a few hundred meters and smoke coming out of its back, then it means that there is a benefit between us and the official institutions. But apart from that, you will not be easily harmed by an airplane flying at 10,000 meters. But since it is an exhaust gas, it is an element that pollutes the nature and pollutes the atmosphere, just like your car. This is a fact, and studies on this are continuing. But apart from these, do not ignore the claims that you see in 1-minute videos without information about the background. Over time, I will continue to make videos about both real conspiracies and false conspiracies pumped to us by the internet like this one. You can stay tuned by subscribing to the channel. Take care. See you in the next video.